The increasing need to deliver public services quickly, accurately, and securely has federal, state, and local government agencies turning to more modern and scalable platforms to manage identity verification. At the same time, it's critical for government agencies to ensure those efforts work successfully for all populations. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and here to talk about those recent efforts, and in particular, the work the General Services Administration has been pioneering, are Dan Lopez, Director of GSA's Login.gov at GSA, and Jordan Burris, Vice President of Public Sector Strategy at Socure. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And Dan, I'd like to start with you. What was the genesis of Login.gov, and why did GSA feel the need to build a government-wide identity management system for a broader group of agencies?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, Wyatt, thank you so much for having me here today. I always love talking about Login.gov. So it's your question. I've been at Login for just over a year, so I was not here for the genesis of Login.gov, but I can give you the story. So the idea of Login.gov originated back in 2016 as a collaboration between GSA and OMB following the release of that administration's Cybersecurity National Action Plan. So this plan had an initial focus on adding multi-factor authentication, or MFA as we like to call it, to government accounts. The general idea of Login was that rather than having each agency implement this functionality on their own, which is costly, time-consuming, and frankly unnecessary, a shared service could be created, and that became Login.gov. By centralizing this investment in a shared service, the idea was that Login.gov would be able to focus on doing this right in one place and reduce cost and complexity for federal agencies. The product was launched in 2017 as an authentication service to agencies and has since expanded to include an identity verification service as well. A major benefit of how Login.gov works is that a member of the public can reuse their single Login.gov account across different agencies as they move through the full life cycle of interacting with the government. So in this way, Login.gov provides the public with what we like to call one account for government that dramatically reduces the time tax of interacting with the government. And as a government-provided solution, Login.gov is accountable to the public, meaning that we invest deeply in equitable access, data privacy, and transparency. Today, Login.gov now serves over 80 million user accounts, 40 agencies and states, or over 40 agencies and states, and over 450 applications.
That's an impressive growth rate. Thank you for sharing that. Dan, let me follow with that. And with the question is, what are some of the challenges around identity management and meeting the needs of all populations, including those with disabilities or digital challenges?
Yeah, this is really core to the work that we do at Login.gov. So as a government service, we have an imperative to serve all members of the public, and to do so while we're respecting their privacy, mitigating fraud, and preserving the integrity of government systems. This can be tricky because reaching the full American public with benefits and services is costly and time-intensive, given the vast disparity in access to facilities, technologies, and support. Yet, even as we're continually working on ways to increase access by reducing the friction involved, we have to do this without compromising on anti-fraud, security, or compliance fronts. So it's a hard problem. That said, that's why Login.gov is focused so heavily on user testing and research to make sure that we can strike the right balance. This involves some obvious things like improving our user experience with a particular eye towards accessibility. When I say this, I mean ensuring that our systems can be used by individuals with disabilities, such as visual impairments. On top of that, we spend time and resources translating our platform, our help content, and our website into multiple languages so that we can reach more individuals. There are also less obvious ways that we're doing this. Things like building government partnerships to reuse data that a given individual has already shared with the government. And we also are taking advantage of existing government infrastructure that's provided. As an example of this, we recently partnered with the United States Postal Service this past year to offer in-person identity verification. This option on Login.gov allows folks who struggle with the online portion of the identity verification process to complete verification in person at one of over 18,000 USPS retail locations. So we'll be continuing to build out this partnership with USPS, and we're always working on new ways to break down barriers in government to make it easier for members of the public, particularly those with digital challenges, to gain access to the services that they deserve.
And so, Jordan, as a leading technology provider in the identity management space, talk to us a little about some of the additional challenges that you see as organizations, attempt to do an appropriate job in meeting the needs of all populations around identity management.
Absolutely, Wyatt, and great to be here today. And I definitely want to take a moment to applaud the work of the Login.gov team and what they've been doing to look and evaluate what next generation really looks like related to solutions. For me, and this is coming from a perspective of having served both in government at OMB, no doubt, between 2017 and 21, as a lot of things were scaling with Login.gov, but now from my role within the private sector, it's important to understand that when it comes down to identity, and more importantly, realizing a vision whereby digital identity is intersectional and works for everyone that chooses to engage in the system, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or socioeconomic status. It's important to understand that there's really three common pitfalls for organizations which really serve to inhibit their progress, right? First, it's the belief that somehow identity is static, and that you can take a one-size-fits-all approach to how you verify it or how you use it. Now, the reality here is that digital identity is constantly evolving, and as such, solutions have to be adaptable, and they have to fit the given context or circumstance by which the information is being presented. The second area would be focusing too hard on the 80% solution or the lowest hanging fruit. Now, that may come as a shock, and a lot of areas, and especially when you think of agile development and things like that, you're looking towards how quickly you can get something spun up. But in reality, and Dan highlighted it very well, it's hard to solve for all of identity, right? And more importantly, when you're focusing on the 80% solution, you're ignoring really effectively the 20% where the most focus needs to be paid and where attention really is deserved. Now, for Socure, we firmly believe that when you solve for the most underserved demographics, when you're solving for those who are otherwise disenfranchised, you're able then to scalably solve for all other demographics or populations as well. And if you don't take this radical mindset into the development of your products or your solutions, you really fall into a pattern whereby your approach to inclusion relies on fallback mechanisms. Now, what do I mean by fallback mechanisms or fallback channels? Think of the in-person process, or think of call centers, right? For many people, that's not their preferred option, but it's only because we haven't necessarily solved for some of the gaps that we see in technology that we, by default, push them there. And so for us, it's about taking that approach to bring them into the fold or into the ecosystem that they've chosen. The third area, it really comes down to kind of this false perception that to create a simple, seamless, and equitable experience for people who are seeking to engage in online services, you have to sacrifice security, right? So, I applaud the perspective that you need to have anti-fraud controls. The reality is that a lot of folks who have this legacy mindset, it comes to older standards, it comes to solutions that are still widely adopted or used. With technology today and the way in which it's advanced, you can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. You can promote a seamless experience that you can deliver in seconds, while at the same time, stopping, nation states or criminal adversaries who would be seeking to thwart really what would be the delivery of online digital services to the American public. And so, yeah.
So those are some great points. Let me just follow with a question. So how have modern identity proofing systems or approaches changed over just the past couple of years to ensure that they can help organizations be fully inclusive and meet the needs of all populations trying to get digital access to services?
Right. So, when you're looking at the way solutions have evolved, right? And I even take it from the perspective of some of the things we called out previously when I worked in the Office of Management and Budget was, back in the 2018, 2019 timeframe, we needed to evolve much of what was being done with identity proofing because there were still a lot of gaps or things that were porous. The reality is that solutions that are taking a modern approach, they're looking to go solve for those systemic gaps in identity, right? The reality for our identity infrastructure today is that it's fragmented. In many cases, we're over-reliant on things that don't work for everyone, right? Think of being over-reliant on using credit records in order to verify someone, or even in some cases, identity documents, where some folks may lack the foundational pieces of evidence needed to establish what would be their driver's license. or their passport, right? For solutions that are modern, they're then using data and understanding of outcomes to understand where they need to focus their efforts next, right? They're using it as, if you will, a roadmap to paint a better picture as to what should change. When they look at an identity, and much akin to my point on the challenge being that identity is not static, they're taking a multi-layered view to be able to better discern the makeup of an identity online, right? Like, what beyond someone's PII that may be presented, or a document that may be presented, what device are they using, what IP address they're using, what email address they're using, how are they acting behaviorally online when engaging with the platform, right? And what are ways that you can streamline decisioning as part of that process, right? And the last area is going to be really the pace of innovation, right? And honestly, to keep up in this area, this arena, it has to be rapid. And you have to constantly be harnessing the latest and greatest in technology, and you can look at that to be artificial intelligence, machine learning. You can look at that to be different tools, but techniques, in order to stay ahead and confirm you're able to solve, again, going back to those systemic gaps. So when you're able to apply this mindset, right, you then are able to move from a process where identity verification may be something where it's like drawing blood and it takes minutes to an hour to do, or to something that can be done effectively in less than a second.
Well, we all would agree. We do want to make it more painless, but still preserve the security, right? So, Dan, can you point to some recent success stories of how government agencies have improved the speed and accessibility and security of their digital systems by employing some of these more modern identity proofing platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So, earlier this summer, we at Login.gov started working with the Department of Labor in the state of Hawaii to offer a simple, secure way for residents to access their unemployment insurance benefits via Login.gov. And when the wildfires hit Maui this past year, we were able to work with our partners, again, the state of Hawaii and federal DOL, to accelerate our planned rollout. So we launched, much earlier than we expected, in order to make sure that the folks who would be turning to that service were able to receive the benefits they needed to help them recover. By doing this, we were able to get thousands of people access to benefits through Login.gov almost a month ahead of schedule. They were able to get this in the middle of a crisis, while also having the peace of mind knowing that Login.gov's security and anti-fraud controls were protecting them throughout. And because Login.gov serves as one account for government, it's also used for FEMA services via the Department of Homeland Security and disaster assistance loans via the Small Business Administration, meaning that Hawaiians were able to use their single Login.gov account to simplify their interactions with the government services when it mattered most in the midst of this crisis.
And Jordan, any additional examples you've seen that would kind of highlight for our audience of ways these modern tools are really helping accelerate digital verifications?
Right, absolutely. I mean, so for Socure, we're deployed across a number of verticals, right, to include state, local government, but then also the federal level as well. I'll tell you, at the state level, one of our success stories comes really into helping to streamline access and reduce friction for those who are burdened. If you think about it, at a time of crisis and in a time where you're most desperately in need, you're not really looking to have an onerous process in order to prove your identity online. In one such state, state of Florida in particular, we were able to support emergency disaster relief loans that were being processed, and being able to do that in a matter of seconds, right, for over 95% of their population that were coming through at the time. For the other 5%, we were actually able, through other automated means, to be able to get them through the process with what would be a minute or two, and all at the same time stopping what would be malicious adversaries or fraud rings, if you will, from intercepting those benefits and keep them away from good people. That's just one area. We've been deployed at statewide identity portals, helping to manage the front door, keep down on, again, what we're seeing is malicious activity. At the same token, helping to streamline access, giving people the same type of experience they've come to expect from industry, the private sector in particular. If you're thinking of financial services, or you're thinking of online banking, et cetera, like, they want to have that when it comes to the government. We've been able to help them achieve that. At the federal level, it's been, in some cases, taking a step back and looking at how do we overhaul existing processes or things that we found were porous during the course of the pandemic, right? And so, as a number of programs and platforms have sought to modernize what they've been doing, we've been engaged with those federal leaders in terms of helping them to carve out a new direction, and again bringing us closer to that kind of nirvana where we're able to provide that simple, seamless, and equitable experience for the American public.
And then lastly, gentlemen, what still needs to happen to improve identity management? And what recommendations would you offer to help agencies, close some of those gaps? Dan, maybe you could take that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, I'll note that the government has made major strides in this area over the past few years, thanks to the work of folks across sectors. So that's places like Login.gov, our federal agency partners, and industry partners. We're seeing strong authentication is now the norm. And we're seeing that both security is improved, customer experience is improved, anti-fraud efforts are improved. So, we're making really significant strides. That said, digital identity verification is still it's still relatively new. It's still changing rapidly, as Jordan mentioned. And in particular, it's extremely challenging to serve that last, I'll say 5 to 10% of folks who don't have traditional identity evidence. So that's these people that Jordan mentioned who don't have a driver's license or a state ID. One of the things that we're excited to be doing is collaborating with NIST as they build the next revision of their digital identity guidelines, which we refer to in our industry as 800-63. This includes a really significant focus on what they call a trusted referee process, by which they can serve all of the folks who are currently getting left out kind of as this final stopgap. So this is really exciting. We're seeing this as a major point of growth for the industry. As for what recommendations we'd offer agencies, we'd encourage them to think about identity holistically. So that means not just asking themselves, how can I provide the technology of an identity verification service, but also, what happens when folks have problems using it? Can they call someone to help them troubleshoot, particularly if they are not as digitally literate, right? How are these agencies going to balance access versus fraud? Obviously, we want to try to do both these at the same time. It's hard. Even, also asking questions like, how are they going to prevent or protect users' sensitive data and ensure that it's not improperly accessed or used for purposes outside of identity verification, right? To give you an example of this last one, at Login.gov, we spend a huge amount of time and effort protecting our users' data, both at Login.gov, where all of their PII is encrypted using their own password and only accessible to them, as well as with the vendors that we partner with for identity verification by creating strong contractual requirements around what they can do with the user data that we share with them, which generally prohibits it from being used for any commercial purposes outside of identity verification. We like to say at its core that Login.gov is a service and not just a product, because of all these considerations that go into digital identity that are beyond just the technology itself. Whether an agency decides to use Login.gov or not, we'd absolutely consider them to embrace this philosophy as well as they're making their own digital identity plans.
I think that point that you make about it's a service, not just a product, is a really important point that shouldn't be lost, because we know that even those of us that are somewhat experienced using digital tools, we still run into snags and we still need help. Jordan, what additional recommendations might you offer?
Yeah, so I'll try not to get on my soapbox and take what could be hours to go through the things that we need to improve. I'll focus on really two key areas, right? One is measuring identity outcomes and using that really to help us make more informed decisions. And what do I mean by measuring identity outcomes? It really comes down to understanding at the time in which someone goes to verify their identity, in which they go to engage in the system, effectively what happened net for them, right? Were they able to successfully get through? Were they inadvertently diverted to another process because they couldn't validate who they were? Do we have the right context around it? Now, by taking that type of approach to measurement, right, we talk about things such as approval rates. We talk about things such as what false positives or false negatives would look like, et cetera, how much manual review you have. But by taking that type of measurement, you're really able to manage the uncertainty behind decisions that comes from using these types of solutions. But then also, again, going back to the roadmap and how do you improve, find ways that you can, make tweaks, make changes within the solution, within the architecture, within the process, to bring more people in through the process, right? Or even put things on the roadmap such that, vendors such as us, can go solve those really hard nuggets, those really hard pieces to solve when it comes to identity verification or fraud prevention. In that same vein, the solution providers themselves, this is something I don't see equally applied across the board. We have to be transparent related to what we are doing with our solutions, our technology, how we're making our decision, how the decisions are being rendered related to the the platforms, right? We have to share these insights. It cannot be a black box. Right. And that's the only way in which we can, uniformly not only help instill trust within the public, but then also within, those who we're working with and partnering at the end of the day. The second area and the last one I'll leave one is network. So, I loved hearing Dan talk about how they're working to establish agreements and partnerships in order to share data. I think, just generally that has to be broader, right? In practice, we have in the industry and identity today, we have way too many silos. Right. And so these silos have to be broken down. This has to be done at the government level. This has to be done and the industry level. This has to be done if you're considering both and how government and industry work together. Right. It's only through exchanging insights and exchanging kind of these experiences, what we're learning, that we're really able to elevate the conversation and apply solutions to the challenges that are common across a slew of use cases, and really drive more towards what would be a vision for us, where we're able to better serve everyone who chooses to engage online through digital services.
And that's the point, right? Is to make sure we're serving everyone fairly and inclusively, and most importantly, helping them get the government service that they expect. So Dan Lopez and Jordan Burris, really appreciate your taking a few minutes to join us, share your respective insights about Login.gov and identity verification in general, and really some of your recommendations as well on ways that we still need to improve that service for America's citizens. So thank you so much for joining us.